All right. I want to talk to Brendan. What about you?
Yeah.
Let's do it. Let's talk to Brendan in South Carolina. Brendan, it says in the notes that Brendan is a pagan, and his question is, should I be trying to get rid of my beliefs? Brendan, is that about right?
Um, yeah. So the short of the long basically is that I've been a pagan for the majority of my life,
Okay.
and a couple months ago I kind of had this realization that if at the time I had become a pagan, I were aware of atheism in general,
Mhm.
I feel like there would have been a chance I would have become an atheist. But that hasn't, like, as I've been thinking that over,
Mhm.
that hasn't really impacted my beliefs. And I was wondering, what your guys' thoughts are. I've enjoyed both of you guys since, you were on like ACA content and stuff like that. And
Oh,
when I found
awesome.
when I found you guys' show, I was like, I'd love to hear your opinion on whether or not there's like utility in
Oh,
me
yeah.
seeking out, trying to get rid of beliefs if I don't feel like they're going away on their own or something.
That is a great question. I think we got to start with defining beliefs. And the way that I define beliefs is a belief is something that you accept to be true. It doesn't have anything to do with whether or not it is true. It's just something that you accept to be true. And so I have beliefs, you have beliefs, everybody has beliefs about things. We accept things to be true about the world around us. What we want to do isn't get rid of our beliefs, it's to challenge our beliefs and make sure that we believe things for good reasons. And so when you're saying, get rid of your beliefs, no, because then you're going to wind up in absolute paralysis, not knowing whether or not the sun's going to come up in the morning. But if you are, not questioning the rituals or just the reasons that you have for doing the things that you do, then it could benefit from healthy skepticism.
Yeah. I feel like, I feel weird. Like, you guys had a call earlier where someone was talking about like, skepticism and being a theist.
Mhm.
So I feel kind of weird. I have applied, some skepticism to it, and a bit of the conclusion that I've come to is that like, I think that my beliefs about gods in general are fairly flexible. I feel like there are a lot of pagans who kind of take a very monotheistic-esque kind of dogmatic view of like what the gods are and like what they're for.
Mm-hmm.
And I stay away from that. You know what I mean? I think that that they really, to me, just kind of represent like things about life. You know what I mean? Just like, staying relatively generic, like a goddess of like, maternity is just representative of like our ideals of like what maternity is. You know what I mean? And so they're like very flexible, and they kind of change over time. They were something to people who worshipped those gods thousands of years ago, and those gods adapted as our views on the same things have also adapted. So like I don't try to live my life
let's
so much.
Yeah. I'd like to challenge that, because I think that is an example of something that, as you get more esoteric, more flexible things get, the easier it is to kind of let things slide through. But if we look at our last caller as an example, somebody who said that their friend was praying for, their cat to get better. If you believed, if you accepted to be true that prayer would cause that healing, would you necessarily have gone to a vet? Would you necessarily have gone to professionals who could take care of that in a way that we understand medicine, right? When the rubber hits the road is when we look at practical application of belief. And so, that is a very, very simple example. There are plenty of people who have denied getting their children medicine or taking their children to hospital because they thought that prayer was the most effective thing to do. And so they did that instead of taking their child to the hospital. And so I think we can really kind of dig into the meat of more practical application of skepticism than talking about the more esoteric stuff. So let's dig into practical application of skepticism. Should you be getting rid of bad beliefs when you're talking about practical things? I think that should be the most important place that you go. Before you get really esoteric, make sure that you are having a good understanding of what you think about medicine, what you think about the power of prayer, what you think about, how we should treat each other, and what are the impacts of the way that we treat each other. Those are really where I think you should be focusing. And I got to ask, how do you feel about applying skepticism there? What has that done for your beliefs?
I feel like I definitely, and you know what I mean? Like, I've said this in conversations I've had with, you know what I mean? Like people like my wife and stuff like that. I feel like I definitely put things in a bit of a hierarchy. You know what I mean? Like I take like physical evidence, you know what I mean? Like science, medicine, that kind of stuff comes first. We have like specific data that shows us how these things, you know what I mean, like work, how these medicines are, you know what I mean, like helpful, how vaccines and other things, you know what I mean, like do function. And so when you've got that hard evidence, like I don't think that this is a kind of a metaphor that I actually just thought of the other day while I was having a conversation. It's like if I'm walking and like I trip on a rock, I assume that rock has been there because I can see it there. I don't think that like it got put there to trip me up. You know what I mean? Like the physical things that we can look at, they're here because they're real. You know what I mean? The medicine works because it works, not because somebody wanted somebody to get better, And so like I definitely place all of that stuff. Like I believe good research first.
Mm-hmm.
So question, believing in good research and recognizing that we have high standards for medicine, or we try to have high standards for medicine, does that make you feel like you're getting rid of your beliefs, or is that living kind of alongside other things that you believe? Is that in opposition in any way to your beliefs?
No, I don't feel like it is. I feel like, it's the, I don't think that the medicine works because of a God's influence, but like, I guess and it sounds kind of Christian-y, but like, I guess I kind of see, I don't know. I'm kind of, my brain's kind of like fizzling out on this a little bit.
Hey, no worries. I think to recognize, hey, you know what, I'm at this place is something I wish everybody did. A lot of people will just open their mouths and go on and on, even if no, you're good. Recognize that as a place to grow. What do you think, B?
I would definitely encourage you to sit in exactly that space, Brendan, because that is exactly the key to talking about these beliefs. That, for instance, medicine works well. And the reason it does that is because we have figured out how to treat certain diseases using science. And where does that God belief come into play? Or is it just in a completely separate arena? So that connection between the two is where I would focus. And there isn't necessarily a right or wrong answer there, as long as practically you are still going to the doctor and allowing, your medical professionals to influence, your treatment plan. But if you are saying, okay, well, I see, things that I value about a healing God in the way that medicine works. Okay, cool. You see a metaphorical connection there that is meaningful to you and maybe might even compel you to pursue medical treatment or to value that as something that you should have. That's cool. If that's the connection, then I don't really have a problem with that outside of I would need to be convinced if you told me that God actually existed,
Yeah.
Right.
Brandon, I hopefully this has been a useful call. I know there's one thing that I usually say when it comes to this concept, and I don't know if I can help myself this time.
You're doing so good.
I'm going to say it.
Okay.
Yeah. Brendan, when we talk about applying skepticism, it does boil down to a deep discomfort in recognizing that you don't know as much as you thought you did. And, boiling things down to why we do what we do can be very uncomfortable. And the term for that is aporia. Aporia, that deep discomfort when you recognize just how tenuous your understanding of things is. And that deep discomfort is exactly what I think V was saying, that you got to sit in, because ultimately that feeling in your belly of discomfort, that's what eureka feels like. And it's a good place to be. Anyway, Brendan, thank you for calling in.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something to think about. And if I get any more interesting thoughts, I guess I'll try and call back.
Absolutely.
Sounds good. Thank you for calling in.
Yep, thank you guys.
Brendan had such good gating on his mic,
Mm-hmm.
whatever he was using, that it sounded like we lost him every time we would take a minute.
Right?
Like, did we lose Brendan? No, just beautiful sound canceling.
Yeah.
I do also want to address real quickly before we move on, this concept of, should I be doing this if they aren't leaving on their own? Right. And like this idea of you can't choose your beliefs, this idea that you're kind of at the whim of whatever convinces you, is actually a really interesting conversation. And in general, I feel like there's this thing where, like, if it's not happening organically, then you're forcing it, or it's not correct, or like you should wait for, the day you wake up and are like, oh, suddenly this thing doesn't make sense anymore. I guess I don't believe it. And that could be how it works for some people, but there isn't a should there, right? There is no ought necessarily. It shouldn't matter whether you are actively trying to disprove something or to prove something, or if one day it just doesn't really make sense to you anymore after you've aggregated a bunch of information naturally. It's probably going to be a combination of both of them. Probably what's going to end up happening is you are going to expose yourself often enough to information that counteracts or contradicts a belief, that one day you're going to think about that belief and go, oh, wait, I don't quite...
Is that for a good reason?
Is that right? Because it sounded right, but also I know these other things.
Yeah.
And then you're going to be intentional, hopefully, about going and looking that up and being like, okay, let me do some research. Where did this belief originate? What are the contradictions here? What are the arguments against it? And then maybe that belief goes away. And that's going to be a combination of things happening naturally, but also being active if skepticism, again, is something that you value.
I honestly, that makes me think of something that happened to me. I would love to share if I get just a sec. It's our show, damn it. When I was a kid, I believed in La Llorona, this woman of the river by where I lived. It was this story that this woman drowned her children in the river, and she would call to her children, and if she'd found you, she'd steal you, take you away. And it was a story that parents told kids in my neighborhood to get us to come in before it got too dark. And I remember I didn't really think too much about it until I talked to a kid from somewhere else who I was like, oh, wait, there's this La Llorona. And they were like, oh, I'm from that town. That was my river. And I was like, no, that was my river.
Oh no.
Yeah. And I went, wait a second. And it wasn't until that really struck, I didn't sit there and try and fight that, but it was that catalyst moment that led me to. So yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It's
going to be a combination.
Agreed.
And there is no perfect way to come to a correct conclusion. If you got there and it is correct, then good for you.